Hi everybody, this is Dr. Childs, and in this slideshow I'm going to teach you how to evaluate internet sources for use in your research paper. Now, the internet is a fantastic tool. It is jokingly called the information superhighway for a very good reason. It is a very fast way to find information. Imagine what it was like doing research before the internet. If you have ever been to some of our local public libraries, some places still use physical card catalogs, and that is much more cumbersome and difficult, time consuming, and so the internet really saves you a lot of work. However, resources accessed on the internet are not all created equal. What this means is there is a lot of really high quality sources on the internet, and there are some that are completely useless. And so the thing is that you have to evaluate whether or not the sources that you find are reliable or not. And this presentation is going to give you some tips on how to do that. Now, the first question you want to ask when you're trying to figure out whether a source is reliable or not is, how did you find the resource? Now, you can use the library to find resources like ebooks, magazines, newspapers, and peer-reviewed or scholarly journals. You can find all sorts of sources, anything you can imagine, through a search engine like Google. Websites, blogs. Usually, Google is not going to find any peer-reviewed journals or scholarly books. Occasionally, you can come across a few on certain topics, so it isn't impossible, but usually you will need to use the library to find your scholarly sources. The reason for that is that scholarly sources are very expensive to produce, and usually the presses and the journals that create those sources do not give them away for free on the internet. The main difference between library resources and other resources that you find using a search engine are that library resources have already been evaluated by someone else, either a librarian or professor, someone who requested that the resource be purchased. So, as I said, these things are expensive. Books and journal subscriptions are not free, and so someone had to think that those sources are worth the money. Because of that, you can depend on a source that is owned by the library because it costs money. Somebody considered it to be worth paying for. If you just use a search engine, then it is up to you to do the evaluating. And as you know, there's a lot of garbage out there on the internet, and you do have to do a lot of work to be sure that you are finding good information. Now, what this means for you at the moment is that you are responsible for finding at least 6 reliable sources for your iSearch paper, your essay that is due at the end of Module 6. At least 2 of these sources must be scholarly, meaning that they are peer-reviewed books or articles that you find at the library. In a different PowerPoint, a different video, I will explain a little bit more about what it means to say a source is scholarly. But for now, you can simply watch the videos that I've posted on how to find these sources in the library. Now, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to evaluate the sources that you find through a search engine. For now, about scholarly, academic, or peer-reviewed sources, all we will say is that these types of sources have been written by an expert and exhaustively evaluated by other experts in the field. So this means that if you find an article in a journal about global climate change, then that article would be written by an expert on global climate change. And then the essay will be peer-reviewed by at least 3 other climatologists who are well-regarded, well-known in that field. Now, if you read an article on CNN.com or Fox News or the New York Times about global climate change, those articles have not been peer-reviewed and they were not written by experts. So while internet sources and newspaper sources may be more or less reliable, they are not as reliable as a scholarly, academic, peer-reviewed source. But when we talk about a source being reliable, we simply mean that it was written by someone with credentials, not necessarily by an expert or a scholar or a researcher, but just someone who is more or less trustworthy, like a writer for the New York Times. It's not easy to get that kind of job. And so a person who writes for a well-regarded newspaper or magazine is someone who has good credentials. A source is reliable if it was published or approved by a well-known organization or a publication with some degree of quality control, like the National Geographic, like WebMD, like the New York Times. A reliable source is one that is unbiased, that has accurate factual information. As I said before, a scholarly source is usually the best type of source, the most reliable. But many other kinds of sources are also reliable. So these are the questions that you want to ask to help you evaluate sources to determine whether or not they are reliable. First of all, who wrote the source? Is it a good writer, someone with credentials? Who published it or holds the copyright? Is it a .com, .gov, .edu, or .org site? Usually .gov and .edu are the most trustworthy because they are sponsored by the government or by a college or university. If you have found an online version of a publication that appears in print, like the New York Times, National Geographic, the Galveston Daily News, for example, then usually it is a little bit more reliable. Blogs and personal home pages are not reliable because they are not versions that have also been printed. Anybody can put something up on the internet, but not anybody can print a newspaper. So usually if it's printed, it is at least slightly more reliable than something that appears only online. If the website has an obvious bias, like PETA.org, NRA.org, NationalRightToLife.org, then it is not going to be a reliable website. The reason for that is that your audience will notice the bias instantly. If you quote the PETA website, someone who is already antagonistic towards PETA is going to instantly disregard your quotation or your information that you took from that website, even if it is accurate. Same for the NRA. If you are trying to write a paper to convince gun control activists that guns actually ought to be freely available for everyone, then you can't use NRA.org as a site because that site itself is instantly going to alienate your reader. So you have to choose sources that not only have correct information, but that will appear unbiased to your reader. Finally, if a website looks cheap or poorly designed, then it probably is not going to be a good source. The reason for that is that practically everybody can either design a website, hire a web designer, or use web design software. If someone puts up a website that doesn't even look good, then there's probably no point in trusting that as a source. These are some good internet sources that you might want to consider, sources that you can find simply through Google or any other search engine. Newspaper articles, magazine articles, or good websites like the Mayo Clinic, WebMD, and so on. These are unreliable internet sources. These sources should never be used in a college paper, and you must not use them in your iSearch paper. These sources do not count as sources for any research paper in this class. Wikipedia, About.com, Answers.com, Yahoo Answers, any other publicly edited site like Wikipedia, like About.com, the eHow, for example, those are not reliable sources, and personal blogs and home pages. I know Wikipedia is a popular source, And this is why it should never be used in an essay for college. There are good reasons. Anyone can edit Wikipedia. However, even if the information in a Wikipedia article is correct, it is essentially common knowledge. It is basic, kind of fourth grade level information. You in college need to be reading more in-depth sources. As Jimmy Wales said, who is one of the co-founders of Wikipedia, for God's sake, you're in college, don't cite the encyclopedia. This is key. You don't want to cite Encyclopedia Britannica in a college paper, and you certainly don't want to cite Wikipedia. If you quote Wikipedia, it makes you look like you didn't do your homework and you don't know how to do research. If you quote Wikipedia, it looks like you didn't read or can't find any better sources. In other words, just to sum it up, Wikipedia is not a reliable source whatsoever. Now, should you just forget that Wikipedia exists? No. You may think I'm contradicting myself. I can't cite it, but I can use it. What? Yes. At the very least, Wikipedia can be a good introduction to a topic. You can skim over, it is common knowledge, but if you need some background knowledge on a subject, it really doesn't hurt for you to go through and read the Wikipedia article just to introduce the topic. Also, Wikipedia articles have bibliographies, meaning that you can read Wikipedia's bibliography, often use those sources as your sources in your paper. So you can kind of use Wikipedia as a trail of breadcrumbs leading you to better sources. All right, so that's it for this presentation about finding and evaluating internet sources. As always, please send me a message if you have any questions.